Hi, I'm Billy, one of the Fuji Guys, and I'm here to show you the top features on the brand new X100S. Let's take a look at some of the cool things this camera can do. Let's take a look at the auto bracketing feature of this camera. To get into those modes, you got to push the drive button and then use the directional pad to select the different drive modes. There's actually a high-speed shooting mode, then there's these auto bracketing modes. This is exposure bracketing. You have up to 1+ stops, minus stops. You have ISO bracketing. You have film simulation bracketing as well as dynamic range bracketing. For this demo, I'm going to show you the film simulation bracketing. It's nice to see. You can go into the menu. You can configure the film simulation bracketing to select the appropriate films that you want to use. So for film 1, I may want to use the APS-C soft film instead for portraits. I also want to maybe for film 2 set it up to shoot maybe in monochrome with maybe a yellow channel. In film 3, I might use the sepia mode right there, as you can see. And so now I have it configured to take 3 shots in those modes. Again, if I'm taking a shot of this scene here, I take 1 shot, and it actually processes 3 different files. And for playback, as you can see, this is the sepia look, this is the monochrome with the yellow channel, and of course this is the APS-C look, which gives me more of a softer look, softer contrast, softer focus. So that's just a quick look at the film simulation mode. It's great for when you want to take a photo of something and you don't want to do any editing on the computer. It makes it very simple where, again, you just aim, fire, take a snapshot, and in that same scene, because it takes only 1 image, it's going to create 3 different files for you in the various film simulation modes. Of course, you can always shoot in RAW and process it in camera yourself and to create those different effects. But this is just a faster mode if you don't want to use the RAW shooting mode on this camera. Let's take a look at the manual focusing on the X100S. In order to use the camera in manual focus mode, you need to change the dial on the side to MF. So I'm going to push it up. And then you basically have the default standard manual focusing. You can use the focus ring in the front to focus in and out. And by looking at the screen here, as you can see, you can focus on the subject, get it in focus. You want to magnify the subject, you can push this button here, and then use that to kind of configure your focus. As you can see there, that's sharp, and it's now out of focus. Okay, and that's just a standard focus. Now, if you want to use some of the focus assist features, let's take a look at that. It does have things like focus peaking, as well as a digital split image. So let's take a look at this focus peaking feature first. I'm going to have it on high, just so it's easier to see. As you can see here, the highlighted area here are in focus. And as I rotate the focus point, as you can see, it kind of moves away from the box. So the focus point is now over on this side here, as you can see. Again, adjusting the focus, you can see it highlights those areas. It gets brighter and brighter. So the focus point is now here. Moving the focus further out again, as you can see, it's now right about in this spot right here for the focusing point. And that's basically how the focus peaking feature actually works. As you can see, it's great when using it wide open. You can zoom in on it as well, so you can definitely see when it gets contrast. As you can see that, I'm going to rotate it away. I'm going to bring it back in. And as you can see, it highlights that. So that's basically, it's in focus. So that's the focus peaking feature of the X100S. In addition to that, there's also a digital split image view that uses sort of the phase detection pixels. As you can see, these are the phase detection pixels located in here. Anything outside this box will not be using phase detection. Again, to use it effectively, you want to actually use the command dial. It pops in. And as I rotate the focusing point here, you see these lines here split the image apart. And as you can see, that line in the box is sort of off its axis. If I rotate the focus point, and when it lines up in place, that means I know it's in focus. Again, if I take a look at an object here, maybe at this pen, it's out of focus. As you can see, the lines are split. As I line up the line, there you go, it gets in focus. You can also definitely use the AEL button to quickly do a quick focus and then manually adjust it as you wish. So if you want for speed, again, that's just looking at the manual focus feature of the X100S. Let's take a look at the X100S multi-exposure. Let's take a look at the X100S multi-exposure mode. To get into that shooting mode, you push the drive button and use the directional pad until you highlight the multi-exposure option. You can push the menu OK to select that option. And the great thing about this feature is that it allows you to take two shots and merge it as one. So if I want to take this shot here, I just pre-focus, take my snapshot there, and it's going to give me a choice if I want to reshoot that or not. I'm going to say OK to that. And then what's going to give me is sort of an overlay of that original shot. So it's a pencil that pen that I've used. And here's another shot of the Fuji Guys bobblehead. And as you can see there, the pen's still in place. I can take a snapshot. And now I'm going to have a dual exposure of the pen in that new scene. And I can save that by pushing the OK button, as you can see. So it's a nice little creative feature on the X100S if you wanted to sort of put two images together. And it does a great job of it. Let's take a look at the X100S Advanced Filter. To enable that mode, you have to go into the menu OK button. You then scroll down in the shooting menu until you see the Advanced Filter options, and you can select it from there. You can push to the right, and from your choices, you got this toy camera effect that gives you that, I guess, nostalgic effect, which is basically some vignetting, some higher contrast, and color. It's a little different as well, or call it toy camera. You also got this miniature effect, which actually blurs the top and bottom portion, giving you that diorama effect. This is useful when maybe you're on top of the ski hill and you're shooting down onto the base of the mountain, and it kind of looks like a fake, miniature setup of that scene. So that's kind of neat to do. Pop color just punches the color and saturation. You got the high key, of course, that's sort of like the wedding shot where things are overblown and washed out. And you got the opposite, which is low key, giving you more of a dynamic look to it, especially when you want to shoot clouds and to get that dramatic look to the image. You also got a dynamic tone, which is kind of neat to play with. You got a soft focus, which kind of mimics, the back in the days when you would rub some, cream in front of the lens to give it that blur effect. You can do that automatically. Of course, for some of you who use cell phones, you definitely understand this effect. As you stick the cell phone in your pocket, the lens does get smudged up with fingerprints, and you also have that same effect. Let's go back to the advanced filter. Seriously, you also got this partial color, which shoots monochrome with a selected color. You got different choices, including the yellow here, as you can see. I just have an example of the XP200, which is in yellow. And as I take the photo, everything stays in monochrome except for anything that's yellow. And this is a kind of neat feature to have. As you can see here, even the actual text shows up in yellow. And that's kind of cool to see that in action. And again, that's basically the advanced shooting modes. And of course, you have different colors there. And you can turn it off. And I believe through the function button, you can possibly have the advanced filter as a quick access button. So I can set that function button to that. So when I want to use advanced filter, I push the function button, and now I have my choices of the different advanced filters, and turning it off basically just by doing that. So that's kind of neat to do. Personally, I'd rather have the function button as my ISO button. I like to manually control that myself. But that's, again, just a quick look at the advanced filters on the X100. Let's take a look at the autofocus. Of course, this camera has a phase detection sub-pixels within the sensor to allow for some incredible focusing speeds based on the lighting situation. Of course, once it can't hit using phase detection, if it's not enough light, it goes back to contrast detection for focusing. Hence why we call it a hybrid autofocus system. But of course, a lot of you guys do like to control some of the focusing points. Let me show you that first. The camera offers a couple of different focusing options. To go into the menu, you can scroll down until you see the AF mode. And by default, it's set to the area focusing, which allows you to select 49 different points. But if you wanted to use sort of the multi-focusing, where the camera will find places of highest contrast, you can use that sort of as a point-and-shoot type of thing, where it should try to adjust the focusing point to where it thinks it finds a focus point. Again, this AF thing will move automatically for you. I don't like doing that, so I'll set autofocus back to the area. Now let's take a look at the area focus, right? You have the directional pad, you can push up And by pushing up, it opens up the ability to move the autofocus points to the 49 different locations within the camera screen itself. Once you move it past from the center of the focus points, of course, you kind of lose the phase detection side of the focusing. So if you stick it up here to the corner, you're no longer having phase detection operating at that point, okay? So that's how you move the different focusing points. You can also use the command down the top here to actually increase the focusing area or to decrease the focusing area. And by decreasing the area, of course, you're getting more accurate with where the camera's going to try to find, focusing, but it might take a little longer. So you want to find the balance between, the scene that you like in terms of how big or how small that focusing point is. So that's that. And to reset the size, you can just push the command down inwards, and it will reset it back to the standard. And of course, the location as well. If you wanted to reset that, you push the display back button, and it will go back into the center again. Again, let's say you want to select a point. You do that. You can just tap the shutter button, and the point is actually there. There's no longer the ability to actually have to confirm that. Push it, move it to the location you want, push button, and snap. It's a lot quicker now, right? As you can see right there, I can quickly adjust. If I want to go back to normal, I push the display back button. Of course, that's just a quick look at the autofocus system on this. When you have it on the continuous autofocus modes, it is dead center and you have no adjustments to move that anywhere, okay? Let's take a look at the X100S video functionality. Of course, the camera itself offers full HD, 1080p, 60 frames a second video. You do have an option for an external microphone if you wanted to via the multi-USB port that's on this. The external microphone that we offer for this camera comes with the adapter from a 2.5 plug to this USB type of plug, and so it allows you to use an external mic. So let's take a look at going into the video mode. You push the drive button, you then scroll down until you see the movie mode, and you can push OK, and you're now in the video functionalities. Of course, in that functionality, you can actually do a few things to the video. First off is you can adjust the focusing mechanism from the autofocus to the manual focus. I generally use manual focusing during video because I don't want it to constantly change focus. So I have that set. In that, I can actually pre-focus using the AEL button, which gives me a quick focus there. I'm a little bit too close, so it's not giving me the proper focus, but there you go. You also can adjust the exposure compensation, so you can undercompensate or overcompensate the scene itself, and you can make it darker or brighter. You can also adjust the aperture on the camera, so you can set it to shoot at an f2 for the video to get that nice shallow depth of field to isolate the subject. Or you can actually create more depth by, of course, setting it to a higher aperture range. So I actually like shooting the, of course, wide open aperture of f2, which is kind of cool to see. And because it's manual focus, I can also use the manual focus ring to adjust my focus on the scene itself, as you can see right there, until I see it's getting into focus. Okay. If you go into the menu OK button, there's also other options. The video mode itself, you can adjust from Full HD 60 frames or 30 frames. The 60 frame is great when you're doing action shot because it's very smooth. It's also nicer when you want to slow it down via the post-processing process, and it's going to give you a nice fluid slow-mo effect to the video. You also can choose in different film options. You can shoot the, different types of film, black and white video, sepia type of look if you wanted to do that. I'm going to leave it at sepia. That's kind of cool. Here's your mic light level adjustment, as you can see right there. And you can adjust the mic input until that it doesn't peak. And of course, the yellow is in that, I guess, 12 decibel mark for when it's the normal volume. Okay, so I'll leave it at 2. You can also change the display custom settings and take off what you don't want to see. And you also have the options of the wide conversion lens, so it knows that you're using that, so you can get the best possible quality. So to record a video, you push the shutter button to start the video. And of course, it gives you basically about a 10-minute video on this camera, and you push stop to stop the video. Now, saying that, would you want to record longer than 10 minutes? Generally movies are made, with very short clips. If you want to record longer than that, this camera is not the camera for you to do that. I recommend sort of a video camera if you want to record something that's over 20, 30, even an hour long in terms of video. I like to keep my clips within 2 minutes and use the editing afterwards to kind of adjust and assemble the clip into an actual full-length video if I wanted to do that. So that's just a quick look at the video functionality of the camera. Again, you can set up to the continuous autofocus if you wanted to start the video, and during the video it's going to use the phase detection pixel. It's going to help to adjust focus as it can. Again, when I'm doing videos, I prefer it to be on just this constant video focus option, or the manual focus option, sorry. Now, the one thing you can't control is the shutter speeds. It has no effect, and you can't adjust the ISO, unfortunately, with this camera for the video functionality. Okay? The camera offers basically a 6 frames high-speed shooting mode. In a single shooting scene, as you can see here, it's still very fast. Of course, it has to focus first in order to get the first shot. If you wanted to do multiple shots and hold the shutter button down, you can go into this mode by pushing the drive button, selecting the high-speed shooting option here. You got 3 frames a second. You also got 6 frames a second, both at full resolution. Depending on JPEGs and RAW, you may have different buffers. So this is just set to JPEGs. I'm going to focus first and hold the shutter button down. And it should fire for me a bunch of shots. And then it's going to go until it hits a buffer point, and then it should slow down. As you can see there, it started to slow down. And as you let go, it's going to continue to write to the buffer. You can still do things with the camera. In fact, you can still take a bunch more shots if you wanted to, but it will slow down maybe quicker until you allow it to buffer. And this is where, again, having a very fast card is going to benefit you from shooting a lot of shots without any delay. As you can see, it's finished writing. Fire a bunch of more shots in this great buffer. And it's a huge improvement over the X100S. As you can see, it's not even finished. I can shoot some more. I can stop. I can fire some more. I can stop. I can fire a bunch more. I can stop. So the buffer is a huge improvement in this mode. In the RAW file, of course, because it's larger, you're not going to have that bigger buffer. It's going to slow down a little bit. But again, this is where I recommend the fastest card possible. This mode is great for really anticipating action. So if you think this camera can't do action like a DSLR, you're probably right. But if you're pretty good at photography and you understand how to anticipate the scene, you can basically pre-focus first, have the subject come by and hold the button down, and out of those shots, you must have gotten at least one perfect shot that's going to fit you for the photo that you're trying to capture. So that's just a quick look at the high-speed shooting mode on the X100S. The uniqueness of this X100S, of course, is the hybrid viewfinder that's found on this camera. It's very similar to the original X100, except for the resolution on the EVF screen up here is a lot higher. It jumps from 1.4 million up to over 2 million pixels. And of course, there's a built-in eye sensor, as you can see, that switches on and off. But you can turn it off by pushing the view mode. If you push one time, it goes to the viewfinder. You push a second time, it's the LCD only. As you can see, you push the third time, it's the eye sensor, which means your eye sticks up to it, and now the information is projected up here. I'm just going to put it to the viewfinder so that I can show you what it looks like through that. This is basically the optical viewfinder here. Maybe a little harder to see. I push the display back button, and I can toggle through the different display options here. As you can see, that's the focusing. I can do things like push the autofocus. I can move it to the 49 different points, as you can see right there, just like you would with an LCD. Now, on the front of the camera, you have this switch. So as you look through it, you can flip the switch, and now you have an LCD representation of the scene. This is going to give you 100% frame coverage. And again, flipping the switch again will switch it back to the optical viewfinder. As you can see right there, anything that's outside that box will not be captured. It also has some parallax adjustments so that as the scene goes further and further, the parallax becomes less and less. But as it gets closer, the parallax will adjust itself. And of course, you know the benefits of an optical viewfinder. It's lag, time. There isn't any lag. It's optical clarity. It's going to help you take photos and really allow you to save even the battery life on the camera, allowing you to shoot all day long with it. So that's just a quick little nice look at that viewfinder functionality by holding and flipping the switch. As you can see, this little thing covers up so that you can actually properly see the LCD. Let's take a look at the X100S display. The default setting, of course, is this information screen that shows you, the shooting information depending on what mode you're at, the shutter speeds and aperture that are used, ISO, and of course other information. We have, of course, the number of shots available, the type of metering it's on, which is on the sort of matrix metering, the file, which is a JPEG large fine, the dynamic range, of course the battery indicator. There's also an exposure compensation information here, and as you change the exposure dial, it also adjusts, as you can see, to a plus or minus, as you can see there. You also have your autofocus information, and as you switch the autofocus, it also switches as well as the focus points. You've got 49 different points, and changing the autofocus points maybe to this corner here will also appear on the screen as well. So I'm going to put that back to the default location. And of course, you push the display back button and it will actually toggle between the different displays. So you got this information display. Pushing it a couple of times brings you to the standard display, which has sort of standard information. And then the last option, of course, is the custom display, which then allows you to basically customize the displays to have grid lines, dynamic range, flash modes, exposure compensations, and you can adjust that yourself by going into the menu and, of course, scrolling down until you see the display custom settings. Either push right or push OK, doesn't matter. And then you have your configuration between the OVF and the LCD/EVF. So you can go in here, you can turn off what you don't like. Maybe you don't want to have a histogram display. Maybe you don't like to have the focus distance indicator. And maybe you don't even want to have the white balance that's showing. You push back and back out again. And again, as you can see, the histograms is gone, as well as all the other settings that I've turned off as well. Going back in here again, you can turn it back on easily by, again, putting it back to normal. And by me doing this, of course, you will have the histogram and all the information back again. Now, the OVF is the same thing. So when you stick your eyes up to this, the LCD screen that is being used, as you can see right there, will also have its own menu. So you still have to push the display button, back button, to toggle between, again, the custom setting display as well as the standard information display or no information at all. So if you don't see what you see in the screen, it's because you also have to push the display back button for that. It holds its own information. The OVF is the same thing as well. So when you switch to the OVF here, it will also have the different custom display settings, as well as the standard display, as well as, I guess, back to the custom settings again. Okay, so that's just a quick look at the display settings on the X100S. Let's take a look at the menu layout on the X100S. You push the menu OK button. It's now changed so that there's actually multiple tabs for the shooting information and multiple tabs for the setup information. And you can actually use a directional pad here to rotate, to scroll through, or you can push the directional pad up and down to scroll through the various options. As you go through each page, it jumps to the next page, as you can see. I go down to the next page, it goes to the fifth page. And if I push down again, it jumps back to the first page for the shooting information. You can also push left on the directional pad and jump pages quickly yourself as well. So instead of navigating through each item, you can go down to where you like, push to the right, and then change that specific settings. If you get out of it and you push the menu OK again, it should remember the last menu that you were at. Okay? I guess this is useful for when maybe you're either using the advanced filters or if you are maybe changing the manual focus assist from the various options that's available for that. Okay? In addition to that, if you want to get to the setup menu, you then have to actually push to the left and scroll down until you get to the setup menu. Then you push to the right, and then you can scroll down or push up and down on the directional pads to get to the various options. Same thing when you get to the last page, the last item, it wraps back up to the first page within the setup. Again, to get back to the shooting information, you're going to push left, and then back into the right shooting tabs, and then back into the menus where you can select things. So that's just a quick look at the new menu on the X100S. Just like the X100S also has a panoramic shooting mode, which is kind of cool to see. You push the drive button and scroll down until you see basically the panoramic mode. So I'm going to push OK on that. And from there, you can actually do sweeping panoramic shots out of this camera. It's a little harder to show you on this camera. I would try. You can change the angle. So instead of 120, you can do up to about a 180. In addition, you can also use the directional and go up and down or left and right. And here's a trick for you. If you select up and down or down and up, you can actually rotate the camera and shoot it this way, and it's going to actually give you higher resolution. Okay, so let's just give that a try for instance. So as it clips away, and it processes the file. If I play it back, as you can see, that's sort of a quick panoramic look at the Fuji Guys filming room, or the opposite side of the filming room. You can push down and it's going to play, it's going to pan right through. This is not the ideal panoramic scene, of course. You're going to have good lighting, so you're going to have very fast shutter speeds that are, typically for outdoor use. It's going to be really good. You can also zoom in on the picture by pushing the command dial and scrolling left and right, as you can see right there. So that's just a quick look at the panoramic mode on the X100S. Let's take a look at the standard exposure controls on the X100S. Just like the original X100, it uses some of the same design layout. And of course, you got your shutter controls here, you got your aperture controls in the front, and you got your EV or exposure compensation dial on the top. Now, when you have both the aperture on A and the shutter dial on A, it's basically in program auto. That's basically the camera's going to determine the shutter speed and the aperture appropriate for the scene. In addition to that, you can also use the exposure compensation to overcompensate or undercompensate for the scene. So again, you can really see that live on the camera. When you set the aperture off of the A, you now actually control what's called aperture priority. So the camera is going to decide the right shutter speed for the various apertures. So in this instance here, at f2, camera selecting 1/105 as a shutter speed, so 1/105th of a second. If I change the aperture to f5.6, the shutter speed is 1/10. If I go down to 16th, and the shutter speed is going to be a lot slower, 1.5, as you can see right there. Okay. Once I put the dial back to the aperture, or the A dial, and I take the shutter speed off the A, I now have shutter priority. So the camera is going to auto adjust the aperture based on my shutter speed that I select. Of course, when you see that a scene, as you can see, the red shows up on the aperture, that means the scene is going to be too bright or too dark at that shutter speed setting. So as you adjust the shutter speeds, the aperture will, of course, adjust appropriately for that. You can, again, use the exposure compensation dial to underexpose and overexpose the scene. Okay? When you have the camera both off the A on the aperture and off the shutter dial on the top, you now are basically in full manual controls. You control the shutter speeds, you control the aperture. If you do it incorrectly, you might end up with a picture that it's too dark. Okay? One way to help you in this, of course, is that, if you look at the meter on the left-hand side here, as you adjust the shutter speeds, you'll notice that it should scroll up higher and higher right there. So at about 1/15th of a second, at 5.6, I should get proper exposure, which, if I take a look at it, it should be exactly the way it comes out, which is great. And that's how you can use the manual exposure modes. Because you're controlling the exposures manually, both aperture and shutter speed, the exposure compensation dial is not active in that sense. So it doesn't actually change the ISO to give you that low flexibility in over and under compensation. Again, hopefully a feature that I can suggest and maybe make changes to for future models, if not the current model here. So again, that's just a quick look at the exposure dials. Other than that, there is no shooting mode. There's no angel mode. There's no baby mode. There's no portrait modes, landscape mode. This is a camera about photography. You need to understand shutter speeds and aperture and how they coincide with the ISO to get the best possible image with this camera. If you are a beginner and you want to buy this camera, that's great. Set it to AA, and basically the camera is basically in automatic mode. Okay. The X100S has, of course, a new button that's found on, of course, the previous models, including the XE1, X Pro 1 cameras in our X series of lineup of cameras. The original X100 basically had a raw button, which then was configured to be a secondary function button with some updated firmware for that camera. This year, it now incorporates a Q button, which gives you quick access to some of the most common used features on this camera, including ISO, dynamic range, the white balance setting, and different sharpness, color, tone, and whatnot, and even focusing modes can be selected through this Q menu itself. Once you configure it to what you want to do, of course, as you can see, you can adjust different settings, and when you turn off the camera and turn it back on again, it should remember those settings that you had last. So ISO 500, it's still there. This little box here allows you to change the different custom modes that you have already preset on the camera. You have 3 different options, and of course, you can't do that within this menu, unfortunately. Hopefully I can fix that down the road if that's a good suggestion. But basically, to configure that Q menu, you have to go into the menu OK button. Again, scroll down until you see the Edit, Save, Custom Settings options. This is where you actually then set the custom mode for each camera. So let's pretend to set custom 3. And what I want to do here maybe is increase the ISO up to 1600. I probably wanted to have dynamic range at 100%. I'm going to select my film simulation mode to black and white with red, which can give me sort of a dramatic effect when shooting landscapes. I'm going to increase my sharpness and increase my shadow tones a little harder. And highlights, I'm just going to soften it a little bit. I'm going to have no noise reduction on this to make sure it's on. Actually, I'm going to put it to low because I'm shooting a black and white shot. I want to get some of those grains. And of course, I then can save the settings. And I guess it's saved now. It's going to confirm again. I push OK. And then once I get out of this, I can push the Q menu. And through this, using the command dial on the top here, I can select my custom 3 settings. And as you can see, it didn't save. And I don't know why it didn't save. Didn't I save it? Let's go back in. Oh, I did save it. Actually, it was set to ISO 500 for some reason. Okay. I know what I did here. I pushed Save Current Settings. Actually, that's kind of interesting. So let's just go back and tell you how that works. I push the Q menu, and whatever I set here, if I wanted it to be saved as a custom settings, I would leave that alone, okay? So just make sure everything is all set, yeah? I would go into the menu, I would go Edit, Save, Custom Settings, select my customs, and say Save Current Settings. When I do that, all those settings found on the Q menu will be saved as a custom setting. So that's another way of setting up this custom mode, which is kind of cool to see. Once I got that set, I'm going to say OK. And now when I push the Q menu and I change to the different modes, C3 is going to have those settings that I've selected. So there's really 2 ways of setting up the custom setting mode. By setting this up first and then going to the menu and saving that information, or going directly into the menu and directly making your changes within the settings and then pushing back to save those settings. And of course, that's kind of cool to see. In addition to the Q menu, you also have the function button. There's just one function button on this camera. To configure that, the easiest way I do is just to hold the function button down for a few seconds. It brings up a screen. From there, I can select the different function options. If I like using the neutral density filter a lot, I'm shooting wide open, I can set that up, and it now becomes my toggle for neutral density filter on, neutral density filter off. And that's going to be great for shooting in bright sunny days. Some of you guys will be selecting that if you like. There's also the ability to do things like the advanced filter. If you want to play with those, you can push that button, select an advanced filter, take the photo, and if you want to get back to regular shooting, just push that button and then get out of turning off the advanced filter right off of that. So that's kind of neat to see. Oh, for most of you guys, you'll probably leave it to the ISO setting like where you can actually control the different ISO options. And of course, looking at ISO, you got the auto function with some limiting options, max sensitivity, max shutter speeds, default low base ISO. So again, that's just a quick look at both the Q and the function button. The X100S, just like the original X100, offers the ability to capture both JPEGs and RAW at the same time. You can either go through the Q menu, where you can change the option from fine JPEG, normal JPEGs, RAW plus fine JPEGs, RAW plus normal JPEGs, or just RAW. For this instance, I'm just going to set it to RAW. I'm going to take a photo with, of course, the RAW image here. And if you're shooting with RAW, I highly recommend you buy yourself the fastest memory card available, whether it's a class 10 card with a minimum write speed. I say at least 25 megabytes, ideally higher if you can, even up to the extreme pro cards or whatever. That's like 95 megabytes per second. That's where you want to be at when it comes to shooting with RAW, especially with RAW and JPEGs. Now, shooting RAW is great. You also have support from both Adobe Lightroom as well as Apple now in terms of supporting the RAW files. But the camera also has the ability to play around with the raw images. And as you can see here, I can actually push the menu OK button and use the built-in RAW conversion software to adjust the RAW files. Now I can reflect the shooting conditions. So whatever settings I have, it's going to create that image out of it. That's basically what your preview that you see already. You can also change things like the exposure values with some negative exposure or positive exposure, all the way up to 3 stops, as you can see. This might be interesting when you want to do HDR photos where you want to push and push the exposure up and down so that you can increase the dynamic range. You can use the film simulation options here and set it up to shoot in sort of like a black and white with a yellow monochrome. You can change the white balance. This is where most of you guys kind of like the idea of having to correct white balance because it's much harder in a JPEG image. Of course, saying that, the camera itself is very good for controlling white balance, and generally I like leaving it in auto white balance unless I'm in a set situation with set lighting conditions, and I've already did a sort of a custom white balance in that sense. Again, you can choose some of these options here. Once you're happy with what you want to do, you can push the Q button and it will create that RAW file and create it into a JPEG. As you can see, it's a monochrome image. I didn't do too much changes to it. Maybe a +3 as you can see, but that's all I did when it came to that RAW file. So that's kind of cool to see. The camera does include Silky Pics, which is a software-driven version on your computer. Some of you guys find that cumbersome, not as good. It's actually quite nice. It's just you need to get used to it. But of course, you can also use Adobe Lightroom or other third-party RAW conversion software out there that is available now for the X-Trans sensor that this X100S camera is now using. The X100S has a silent mode. To enable that silent mode, all you have to do is push the display back button and hold it down for a few seconds. Once that's completed, it comes up with a menu telling you that it's in silent mode. That means the flash will not fire, any of the AF light will also not fire. There will be no sound emitted. And so when you take a photo with this camera, what you hear is actually only the mechanical sounds and no artificial sounds. Of course, the flash is also disabled. Now, if you want to use the flash but want to disable all the sound on the camera, you don't go through the silent mode. So again, I'm going to turn off the silent mode by holding the display back button for a few seconds. It is now turned off, as you can see. And I go and push the menu. As you can hear the sound noise, of course, right? You want to turn that annoying sound off. You can. You can push the directional pad to the left, go down to the setup, and go to the page that indicates the sound and screen setup. So let's look at the sound setup first. I'm going to select that. First off is the operational sound. That's the menu that you hear, the clicking noise that you hear there. I'm going to turn that off. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to turn it off. Secondly, it's the shutter sound. This is the sound of the shutter as you push the shutter button, but it's actually an artificial sound. Let's take a look at some of the options available. So this is so all three sounds are of your choice. I don't like any of them, and the great thing about this camera is with the electronic leaf shutter, it's quite silent. And to silence this artificial sound, you go into the sound shutter volume and you basically turn it off. Okay, so I'm going to go back out of this menu. The next thing to set up, I think, is the setup screen or the screen setup. And if you're looking about speed and silence and whatnot in this camera, I would change the image display and switch that to the off position so that when you take a photo, it's ready to take the next photo. It doesn't show up with another photo delaying your shot. This is sometimes confused with some people when it comes to shutter lag or shot-to-shot time being low-slow. That's because you got the image display switched on. So you want to do that. There's a couple of other options here, of course, on the screen. There's an auto-rotate option, and you should have it set on. And what happens is that when you do that, the images will, when you shoot vertically and you play it back, it will play back as a portrait instead. But if you want to turn that off, you can turn it off, especially when you put this camera on a tripod, you're in a studio environment and you're trying to shoot more of a portrait orientation. You can then turn off the auto rotate and you'll get the full image displayed on the screen versus that rotated image that you see like that, okay? So that's just a quick little tip there on the sound and screen setup. So once I get out of here now, as you can see, there's no more sounds to the menu, as you can hear that. And when I take the photo again, it is silent, but I can also enable my flash, of course, so that if I wanted to shoot with flash photography, the flash will go off. Okay, so that's just a quick look at that quick little tip. Again, these are some incredible features that you can find on this camera. Don't forget, again, to subscribe to my channel and also follow me on Twitter. Until then, I'm Billy, one of the Fuji Guys.